Hello, welcome to Numerically Speaking Live. I'm Dana Boquin. I am a developer relations engineer at Anaconda, and this is a show where we get to go deep into what's going on in the Python ecosystem and learn from the people who are building it. So I am here as a stand-in for your normal host, Dawn Wages, and I'm excited to have the chance to introduce my friend Nicole. So Nicole, I'd like you to come on and give yourself an introduction.
Hey, so it is nice to be here, and I am going to tell you all sorts of weird things about myself.
I'm ready
First,
for it.
I am a staff product manager, which we can discuss a little bit later what exactly that means, because it's an interesting role that varies depending what company you work for. I also am a board member and a person who runs multiple events like B-Sides Edmonton, Sky Talks, and the Diana Initiative, which host a variety of different events in the cybersecurity space. And I also hang out at the open source, the OSSF working group for vulnerability disclosures. So if anybody is
Alphabets.
interested, yeah, so many alphabet soups. If anyone's interested in vulnerability disclosure programs, we've got a bunch of templates that you can leverage. And it is a very fun discussion with all of the vulnerabilities that have been getting disclosed lately.
Well, it's great to have you on. And if you could say a little bit more about, like, the kind of work you're doing and what you're here to talk to us about, I think it would be really great to give everyone a little preview of where we're going with this.
So right now I get to product manage for a small team of developer who is doing R&D. And what are we doing R&D? We're trying to figure out how to make people use Python better. Very broad. We have so many ideas, pages and pages of ideas. Where we ended up starting with was, what if we continuously profiled environments that you chose to watch and made it really easy to interact with that data and leverage that data to make actionable choices and optimize your code. We have other ideas of how that can kind of grow in the future, but we've got an alpha together and we're going to be switching it over to a beta very soon, and we are looking for people to beta test it.
Well, that's exciting. I'm not sure if you want to say anything more about profiling before we move on into the news, but the plan for the day is to kind of start with, these introductions. We'll get a little bit more of background. We're going to talk a bit then about the news, a couple of stories, things that are happening in the ecosystem before we move on to a deep dive into the kinds of skills that Nicole brings to the table and is able to kind of walk us through why we should care about profiling and give us a better sense of how it's done by showing us how to do it live. So, Nicole, I wasn't sure if you wanted to say anything else before we jumped into the news.
I think just in general,
Yeah.
I have not profiled much in my life, and when I have had no idea what to do with the output.
Well,
Because you usually get like this crazy flame graph, and it's like, okay, great, I have a lot of data. What do I do with it? So it was very interesting having that be the proposal that we decided was the most actionable, because I've had to learn a bunch about Python and Python profiling to accomplish that. And I am very grateful that we currently have agents to help us out.
yeah, I think that my experience is very similar. I know when I started building my own software, building tools, uh, my understanding of the hardware that I was using in particular was pretty minimal. And so learning how to do things efficiently and under the constraints that you have is complicated and a bit intimidating, frankly, especially when you're just getting started. So I'm glad that when we get more into this, there's ways to sort of lower the barrier for entry into trying to make your code more efficient.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think we've got some interesting news stories to go over.
Good segue. Good segue. So, the news. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of a topic and then we'll talk about it just a bit. We've got 3 stories to talk through with you, and let's get started. So, to start, um, let's get a big picture before we get into the specifics. For years, like the Python is slow situation was just kind of accepted. You'd hit like a CPU bottleneck and you'd reach for multiprocessing and you'd accept like serialization overheads. And then you'd move on. And now you don't have to feel that way because in 2026, this year, that claim is genuinely more complicated than it has been historically, because between free threading and the JIT compiler and the multiple interpreter support in Python, we're looking at like a fundamentally different performance landscape. And data pipelines, web apps, ML processing, you can now use true parallelism in places where we used to need workarounds. And so with that frame in mind, there's a couple of stories from this week. So first up, everybody, I mean, somebody actually put numbers on free threaded Python in a real web framework. A developer ran benchmarks on Fast API, and it's now officially supports free. I guess the reason why this is hard to say is because, and I'm stumbling a bit, is it's just hard to say free threaded. So give me a little
Also,
bit.
just say Gil.
Gil. So
Yeah,
um,
there's no Gil anymore.
there's no Gil anymore. So same code, same endpoints, just different Python binary. CPU bound endpoints jumped from about 4 requests per second to about 32. And so that's like a roughly 8 times increase, like with no code changes. So there's 2 caveats though, and your inner skeptic might want to hold on to them. And one is that this is based on really only a single benchmark from one person's setup, that numbers I just quoted. And so you should treat the exact numbers more as like directional. So the other caveat I'd say is that the in-out endpoints show essentially no difference because the GIL was already being released during network and database waits. So if your app spends its life waiting on Postgres, this isn't your speed up. This isn't going to be the thing that makes a difference for you. So Nicole, I don't know if you have anything to add before I kind of could just go on a bit more, but I see you shaking your head.
So, yeah, it's for anybody who hasn't really thought about it, oh, great, we've now got free threading and everything's going to magically get faster. Maybe. So the first thing is you do need to switch out your interpreter, because there's the free threading interpreter and the not free threading interpreter. Now, if you take the free threading interpreter, you can tell it not to. But so first you do need to make that swap out, but in theory, you wouldn't have to change any of your libraries. Now there's a whole bunch of catches on top of that. Not all libraries support this. And so if the library doesn't support it, it's going to kick back into guild mode.
Yeah. So
And so,
you
depending
get
which
Bill
libraries you're
relabeled
using,
on you quietly.
exactly, you may not get it. And I'm sure libraries are going to work to add it over time. There's actually a website, pi-free-threading.github.io, that's
Mhm.
tracking which libraries have done it and not, so you can kind of see if your packages are there or not. But you pretty much mentioned the big catch right there. If you're already using Asyncio or you're waiting a lot, Python was kind of letting the threads interrupt one another during wait.
Mhm.
So you're really not going to get a market improvement. Now, on the other hand, if you are doing something like machine learning or image processing, you absolutely could get cool, amazing improvements.
Be excited. Be excited.
Yes.
Um,
Depending what you're doing, be excited.
yeah, but I think that that's really like a good argument for like measuring what you're doing instead of just like assuming that things will happen, like being really more aware of what's happening within Python so that you don't just like read, oh, this is a new great thing. It sounds perfect. Let me see the benefits, and then you just get to be sad.
Now, on the upside, you could switch your interpreter and run one version of your software with all your unit tests with the old interpreter and one with the new interpreter and compare. So it's not like you'd have to rewrite anything to see whether you get the improvement. And I think there's also a couple of commands that I can't remember off the top of my head where once you switch, you could see whether it's secretly getting re-enabled because of some of your libraries. So you really could test this pretty easily to see if you are going to get a win or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that there's a lot of different ways that you could kind of follow the path and figure out whether or not this works for you. And it's something that you want to start incorporating into how you think about architecting what you're building. Um, but we do have two more stories, guys. And I have slides where they change the little banner at the bottom, which is kind of exciting for me. Um, so, on
For
to
anyone
story
who didn't know, new to StreamYard, so we're playing with
new to
toys.
StreamYard me. Yeah. So, uh, I am not usually your host. Dawn Wages is typically the person here. And so I am both learning how to do this and just getting to play with the tools for the first time. So if it's a little clunky or I do something weird, give me a little grace. I am trying my best here. But story number 2, we have the news banner for story number 2. So Python 3.15 beta 2 is out, and it's a big one. There are 3 things to kind of know here that I wanted to highlight. So one is lazy imports. So PEP 810 brings like explicit lazy imports for faster startup times. So modules only get processed when they're actually used, and you can opt existing code in programmatically or with an environment variable without rewriting your imports. So if you've ever profiled a CLI tool and discovered half your startup time was importing pandas to use one function, this might be for you. So
You will still get the hit. So just kind of the caveats that we talked about in the last
yeah.
one. Like at some point you do need to import the module, but right now you import the module whether you use it or not. So
Mhm.
now you don't have to take the hit until it's actually needed.
Yeah. So the JIT keeps getting better. So we actually were talking before we got on here about whether or not you pronounce JIT or you just read it as just in time, or if you say JIT, because I realized that I don't think I've ever heard anyone say JIT out loud. So I just
Because
wasn't sure.
nowadays everything is you're reading a news article or you're
Mhm.
reading a JIRA ticket. It's not that you're talking about these things in a conversation with someone. It's in your head. So how do you say it in your head? I say, like I auto translate to just in time, or I say JIT in my head. So in chat, if you want to, out yourself as how you decide to do that, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a right answer here, but I'm just going to keep saying JIT because that's how I read it in my mind. Feel free to tell me that's silly, and no one does that, Dana. But the JIT debuted back in 313, mostly as foundation work, and in 315 is now showing roughly, I've got 8 to 13% geometric mean improvement over standard C Python. So depending on your platform and workload. But this isn't earth shattering on its own, but it compounds with everything else. So, you've got incremental improvements, and over time, those incremental improvements mean much more. So I don't know. I see you again nodding, so I don't think I'm off base with this. Any
Yeah,
caveats to add?
so it's mostly been tested on Linux, and like you said, like 12%. And the benchmarks are all saying 10% faster and whatever. But I'm sure everybody knows about benchmarks. They're looking for very specific things. So that doesn't mean your program's going to get 10% faster necessarily.
Yeah. So I think that it's kind of like with our first story. This is more like a directional thing to pay attention to. The point is, things are improving, and they're improving in such a way that they're meaningful over time. These smaller improvements get meaningful over time, and you should see how this changes what you've got going on. Don't just assume it's going to be as good as the benchmarks say, but something will happen.
You also want to keep an eye out for PEP 744. So
Tell me more.
That PEP is saying, and they phrased it very nicely, but basically, hey, this has kind of been experimental. It's been getting worked on for a long time, but there's not been a finalized solid plan. There's been a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of work, but there's not a goal, a design decision of this is the design, this is the goal. And so in order to make it permanent, that just in time is going to stick around and not be an experiment, the PEP needs to move forward with what is the design, what is the goal, what is kind of the scope. Kind of, if any of you are a developer by trade, I'm sure you have a ticket that you work on in GitHub or Jira or wherever that says like, what is the scope of work that you're about to take on? And essentially they're saying, hey, the time has come, we need to define this. And so I don't disagree with that. I think that is very reasonable. Everyone's played with it. The experiment has been experimented. People seem to like it. Time to decide where it's going.
Okay. Well, we've also, speaking of PEPs, so PEP 799 adds like statistical sampling profiler designed for low overhead monitoring. So the kind that you can actually run against production code. So handling high frequency sampling without the usual instrumentation tax is something that, is out there now with PEP 799. I wrote down 799.
So a bunch of that. So I was also excited about this one when it first came out. And then I talked to my engineers and I got less excited. Apparently a lot of those features are out there, but they were kind of like scattered willy-nilly all over the place. And so what it sounds like is happening is that they're getting kind of solidified into one location, and like we are making these the profiling things, and we are making sure they're efficient and boxing them in together. So there's probably going to be like some improvements, but I don't think, at least from what I understood after talking with my developers, that there's like a huge change. This is a lot of organizational change and some tweaks, which is all great, but it's not like when I read it, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Are we going to get like great performance improvements with the stuff we're doing? And they're like, no, sorry.
Yeah, so like maybe there's like a little bit of an overpromise tone with how it's being presented out there. But, I think having a grain of salt with each of these news stories that we've talked through, like, I think is realistic for any claims that are, based on benchmarks or have, I think, a little bit of a promotional spin on them. Oh, shoot.
You always have to be positive and upbeat because the internet's going to be the Debbie Downer.
Yes. So you have to like be ready for the people to come in and tell you, but actually.
Yes.
So, and I am just realizing that I didn't change my little banner and now we're kind of through the news, but that's okay. Um, we're at the point now, though, in the live stream where we've gotten through some of the big things happening. And if you've got questions about any of that, or you want to continue or have some more discussion of that, the chat is open. But the reason why we've got Nicole here fundamentally is to talk about profiling. So, what is it? Why should you care? Nicole, I think that this is where you can kind of take it away.
Awesome. So it's turtles all the way down.
It's always turtles all the way down. Why is it always turtles all the way down?
So profilers are software programs that you run to watch your software program while it's running.
Perfect.
And
No notes.
why though? Why are you going to run a software program to watch your software program, right?
Tell
There's
me
tons of
about it.
reasons. There's tons of reasons you might do it. In this particular case, it is basically looking for how many resources and actions and things your software is doing. What is taking the longest time? What is using the most resource like CPU?
Mhm,
What is happening very frequently?
mhm,
And it's putting that all together for your application running so that you can kind of look back on that data and be like, what is the slowest, most inefficient thing that I have?
mhm.
But hey, why do you even care? Nowadays we have
That's a good
bigger
question.
computers and like I could just buy more stuff, right? I could buy a better computer. I could buy a better server. But that costs money. And like earlier you mentioned hardware. So what if you only have a certain amount of hardware? What if you only have a certain amount of budget? What if you can only get a certain cloud server provisioned to you? What if you're trying to deploy on something little like a Raspberry Pi? Like, who has
Yeah.
not done a Raspberry Pi project here?
Or you want something to be able to scale efficiently. So it might work well or work sufficiently just like on your computer, but does that scale up the way that you need it to?
Right. And so, first, you're going to look at doing profiling to match, am I optimized my code for what happens the most often? Because if you have something that runs slowly and you don't really run it frequently, you probably don't care. But if you're running it so much,
Yeah.
that is going to add up. And as a user, don't you hate it when a web page is spinning or an app is spinning? You're like, just get me to the next thing so I can click or do whatever it is I want to do. Nobody has patience anymore. I don't want to wait. You don't want to wait. So
And
you want
then-
your app to be responsive.
and you want it to be
Or
reliably responsive.
exactly. And so first, just can your code, the things that are most frequent, be better? And next, like we talked about, for the hardware you're planning to deploy to or the hardware that you have, what is the biggest constraint? And you may not know that out of the gate, but if you're running a profiler and see
Mhm,
like, hey, I'm pegging out my memory because this particular device that I'm using or server that I'm using is memory constrained and memory is super expensive right now,
mhm.
let's optimize for that. Or maybe you're CPU bound. Let's optimize for that. So wherever your constraints are, you can optimize for your particular circumstance.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting at too is you're able to make a much more informed decision about these resources that you have. I think that without profiling, you're kind of making a lot of assumptions and you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. Now, we mentioned earlier that there was going to be the improvements to profilers in Python itself. So Python has cProfile. There's also tons of other profilers out there. So pick up a profiler wherever you please. They're available for all different kinds of language. They present their data in all different kinds of ways. What you're going to be watching for is how intrusive are they? So
Mhm.
most of the time, you're probably going to be looking for something that's a statistical profiler that's just sampling. And so this way, if it's just looking occasionally, it's not draining your system to get the information about system efficiency.
Because it's because of the turtles.
Yes, exactly. Because if that application's eating everything, then your application can't eat everything, and yeah, the turtle's all the way down. Now, you also can circumvent doing a profiler at all by putting instrumentation into your code itself. So if you have some tools, observability tools, application monitoring tools, you might instrument into your code certain wrappers or functions that will actually be recording things just as part of the application. So your application could just be monitoring itself, which in some circumstances makes perfect sense, because you're like, I really need to know all the time the performance of these particular functions or these things, or I want to use this particular software vendor to monitor my stuff and do whatever. But that means that you're having to implement that. The nice thing about profilers is you didn't have to instrument anything within your code. So there's multiple ways to come at this, and it just depends the situation that you're in and what you have available to you.
Have you started to adopt a particular approach, given your development work?
I did go to school for computer science. And then I did write some code that ended up in various production servers, which is slightly terrifying. But now I pretty much, me and Claude are buddies, and Claude writes a lot of the code. So I do not do instrumentation because I would have to like explain that to Claude, and I'd have to know enough in depth for implementing it in the right places. So A, we're working on a profiler, but B, also there's C profiler and other profilers out there. So I usually tend to look at things from the outside as opposed to implementing it from the inside.
Yeah, so I mean, that makes sense. And I think that when we get into your demo later, seeing more of a workflow involving Claude would be great. So when it comes to profiling, I think that I don't know how pervasive this practice already is. If this is something that people are doing often, I know, like as a data scientist, and this wasn't really something that was on my mind a lot. A lot of the time, it was just like, I've been asked a question, and there is math to do, and whether or not that was being turned into something in production wasn't really necessarily like in my purview. So I don't know, like in your conversations with other developers and things like that, does this just come up, or is this the kind of thing that it's more, just a concern to more of a subset, and it becomes more of an issue when you're starting to think more about production?
I think this is a good place to do a super weird segue into
I'm ready for it.
product managers and user interviews. So
Great.
the people which I have talked to currently, if you are in an industry where speed matters, maybe you're doing fraud detection, maybe you're doing intrusion detection for security. If speed really, really matters, they are hyper aware of optimization. And then there's everybody else. So that's kind of the divide that I've been seeing, but I also haven't got to talk to a ton of people. Now, as a product manager in general, some companies apply that word and mean different things. But in most cases, it means you are doing market research around problems, and you're doing then like, hey, I think this is a problem. Then you're talking to your users or people that potentially could be your users. You're not trying to sell them anything. You just want to have a conversation and be like, is this a problem that you run into? How often do you run into it? How do you solve it today? And figure out whether it would make sense to write that code or add that feature. And then you define, okay, based on the market, based on talking to these users, I'm going to work with a user experience person and everything. We're going to define this feature, and then I'm going to hand it over to a development team to implement. And so product managers in general always want to talk to people who are within their market, and they should not be selling to them. I can't speak for every single company, but it shouldn't be a sales conversation. It's usually just like a friendly conversation, like, hey, tell me about what you're doing with Python at your
Mhm.
job and what problems you run into. And then they're probably going to steer it their direction. Again, not to sell you, but more to be like, hey, I'm particularly interested in profiling. So are you concerned about speed and optimization? Is anyone in your company? Do you do anything about it? Do you have instrumentation that's auto implemented? Like all they're going
Mhm.
to take you down a particular path, but it usually starts out with just like, hey, please tell me about like what you're doing, because we want to find out like, is there something that's kind of coming up in the market or something that's like actually going away in the market that we should
Uh-huh.
be aware of.
Mhm.
And so like you may see calls for people to do a user interview or nothing important happens in the office, Nahito interview. These are not sales calls. Please talk to the product managers if they're at a conference or whatever, because they desperately want to find out what you're doing and they don't want to sell you things. And so there will be a link in the show notes to talk to Anaconda's product managers, because they really do just want to talk to you and not sell you things and find out about how you're using Python. So in my conversations I've had with people, you either care or you don't care. And part of our opportunity, or the opportunity that we saw, was if we can make it so that the profiler is kind of always quietly running in the background for a particular environment that you're working on. And maybe I get a ton of feedback during the beta, which you can sign
Mhm.
up for again in the show notes.
Hey.
Maybe I get a ton of feedback
Good
that,
plug.
like, actually, I don't want it to always be running, but I want you to have some kind of hook into Visual Studio that whenever I start a session, it's like, hey, did you want to start profiling, and just make it like a quick button or something? Like, I don't know. I need to find out from users.
Mhm.
But the concept we have is if we make it super easy
Mhm.
and store it in a way that works with agents, then everyone can benefit from this, as opposed to the people who are super familiar with it. I
Mhm.
came into this not knowing much about profiling, and so I'd see the thing and I'd be like, okay, I know that's bad, but what do I do with it? And then I'd
Yeah.
go to a search engine, and I'd go to Reddit, and I'd go to Stack Overflow, which tells you how old I am, and look for somebody in a similar situation or ask the question and just try and figure out like, what do I do with it? And we're going to see later in the demo that agentic stuff, whether you're using a local coding agent or one of the commercial ones, it given that data from a profiler,
Mhm.
if it can talk to that data and understand that data, and it has access to your code, it can help you make the change. And then bonus, because you're profiling, because you're watching your code, you can compare before the optimization, after the optimization. Did it actually get better, or is the agent messing with me? Because we all know agents can lie.
Yeah, they can lie or they can add technical debt when they solve your problems. Things don't always become more efficient just because they work. Um, but I appreciate what you're getting at when you're talking about, what you're trying to do when you have these conversations with people. I'm in developer relations. I similarly want to understand what the community needs and find more of the signal in the noise. And I usually start conversations by saying, like, well, what makes your day hard? Like, I don't have necessarily,
An
the question
angle.
about something particular, but having those really frank and honest conversations really does surface ways to make the tools that people use better. So I just kind of wanted to double down on, if someone tries to contact you to ask for your opinion, it's because your opinion really matters, not necessarily because they think you should buy something.
Yeah. And I
Um,
know we all get inundated with sales stuff, but kind
yeah.
of, pivoting back to optimization. All right, so I can profile on my machine, or I can profile in my test environment. Cool. That kind of brings up another point of, you can set up profiling to actually be part of your test suite if you have
Mhm.
like a particular test suite that runs. And this way you can kind of, one of my developers demoed something where they had kind of the agent working in a loop, or when it would promote a change, there was like certain criteria it had to hit on the performance. Otherwise, it had to like retweak the code and try again until it could hit that. I'm sure there was like, after X amount of tries, give up or whatever, and just pick the best out of them. But now that there is that opportunity, you could make that part of your test suite. Or even if you don't have the
Mhm.
agent looping and trying to fix it, at least you could have that data. And especially if you're doing load testing, because sometimes something is performant when it runs X number of times. But when you try and scale up, maybe you suddenly need to scale up because you have tons more customers. That's great. That's wonderful. But are you suddenly going to have an emergency because you actually don't scale up that well. Load testing is a great thing, and you should do it occasionally, especially if you're hoping to exponentially grow. An example from when I used to be a system administrator, we used to have the Oprah effect. Again, I'm old, sorry.
I'm
And
I'm getting all the references, so I'm there with you. I think the number of problems I solved with Stack Overflow is all of them. So, I mean, go on.
and so if somebody, one of our customers, ended up on Oprah, they would suddenly have to scale and bad, horrible things would happen. Or sometimes, even if they didn't have to scale, bad, horrible things would happen. There was one particular customer who had a bunch of web servers, and every single night at 2 o'clock in the morning, you had to sequentially reboot one, let it get back online, get all ready, then go to the next one, reboot, go to the next one, and you'd go through all of them and make sure they all rebooted, because there was such a bad memory leak that if they were not rebooted once every 24 hours, they 100% would crash out and take down this customer's website for doing e-commerce orders. And even if we did reboot it once a day, there was still a chance, if they had unusually high activity, they would hit the memory leak condition and crash out.
This is one of those stories where you like feel the fragility, you feel the, I don't know, mousetrap-esque solution where it's just kind of glued together. But it's kind of more of like an anti-pattern where I guess this works, but this is definitely not the way that you should be doing this. Are you there?
I think my internet is going slowly.
It's possible. There was a little glitch there. So anyone listening, this really is live. That's how you can tell. That part's not edited out.
So hopefully the demo gods
Well, you're
let
back
me,
now.
fingers crossed. Canadian internet, folks, Canadian internet. So yeah, I guess kind of the TLDR on that is that profiling can matter to anyone if you are deploying this to share with other people. If you're just doing something that's not going to get deployed or shared, you probably don't need to worry about it, unless maybe you're deploying, like we said, to a Raspberry Pi, and you need to make sure that it can actually run on the Raspberry Pi and not crash out on the poor little Raspberry Pi like all the time.
Oh,
So
I think, is that a good segue into actually seeing how this works in real life? Because
I
we do have
think so.
a demo. We do have a demo for you.
Yeah, if you want
So,
to pop up my screen, I'll actually start with explaining what I think we have to switch to a different view. Yeah. So I'll explain what we did
yes,
first.
I love
Again,
that.
profiles are not
There
a
we go.
novel situation, but for our particular circumstance, we installed the Conda package that is the profiler, and it actually came bundled with a couple other things. So there's the profiler
Mm-hmm.
that's doing those statistical samples. There is a SQLite database where all the information is getting shoved into. There
Mm-hmm.
is a MCP so that any agent, local, commercial, whatever, can chit chat with the SQL data and understand the SQL data. It can also chit chat and see, is the daemon listening? And so that's another thing that's in there, is the daemon's just a listener. Its job is just to get things from that sampler and move
Mm-hmm.
them into the SQL database. It's not that exciting, but so then the final step is you need to pick an environment to monitor. You can pick multiple, and it doesn't matter what type of environment it is. It can be any type of Python environment. Once you monitor it, it then kind of is marked so
Mm-hmm.
that when it runs, it produces events. The listener hears the events, shoves them into SQL, and then you can view those either in like a little local UI that we've got going right now or an MCP. And that enables you to, in my particular case, use Claude, which I'm going to be showing you, to figure out what's going on. So
Let's get
first off,
into
let's
it.
see if the listener is listening. Is the daemon running? So is the daemon running? I don't know why daemons are called daemons. That would be
I
Interesting. Somebody.
actually think that there's a reference to Socrates in there somewhere.
Hmm.
So I feel like I've read that, and someone can fact check me on it, but I think that's why it's spelled the way that it is.
Yeah, I guess if
Like,
anyone
because I think
is
daemon used to be like your conscience almost, or like something that was watching, or like,
watching you.
yeah, I think that it wasn't like demon, but daemon. Anyway,
If anyone knows in chat, like post a link to Wikipedia or whatever. So, okay, the listener is listening. Let me find out what environment am I monitoring with observable Python right now? So remember, I said you had to mark an environment to be watched, and you could do
mhm,
one or more. So am I actually watching any environment? Okay, so Python starter. I happen to know Python starter is this environment. Yay! I am going to run the bad caching pattern. And it took 0.084 seconds. I know that doesn't seem long, but if you're running this a lot for a lot of customers, that adds up.
could it be
So
more not long?
potentially, hopefully. So we're gonna pop back here, and then I'm gonna be like, hey, for the recent sessions of main.py in starter Python, can you tell me what is inefficient and how I could fix it based on the profiling data we have? So usually I would look at a flame graph and it would say, this is terrible and that is terrible. And then I would go to Stack Overflow or, a search engine and be like, what do I do about this? We're going to simplify things and it's going to tell me that, okay,
We have
it's,
answers.
it's got lots of stuff. So it's going to tell me, hey, I've got some guild contention going on with a bunch of threads. And here I've got some waiting for completion. And we're going to, like, here's how to do the fixes. Isn't that great? And hey, here's the summary. You can switch out CPU bound threading for multiprocessing, do the NumPy thing, add caching, and it can say, hey, I want to look at the files and show me specific code changes. Spoiler alert, I already did that. So
But
I
now we can
went,
see what you did.
yes. And I was like, hey, I am gonna like give me an example of something where we're gonna do a recommendation engine and
Mhm.
write it as if I was like a newbie, because I'm a newbie. I'm using Claude to code. I have no idea what's going on. And it gave me this code on the left. And then we ran the profiler, and I was like, okay, fix it based on that. Just write me some new stuff. And so it did write me some new stuff, and that's on the right hand side. And like we said, do not trust the machines. The machines can lie to you. So we are going to run the good code now, and hopefully it will be good. And the answer is 0.053. So it
Huzzah.
definitely has improved success. And you can see here that, there was some direct swap outs. We're going to go look for some caches here, but there's a whole bunch of changes right here. Like this whole section
Mhm.
got
Big
added
additions.
because you have to be like, hey, the cache, is the cache fresh? Let's
Mhm.
return it, yada, yada, yada. But overall, it went faster. And I didn't have to do it. Claude did it for me. Yay. And you
Right.
could use a local coding agent, whatever, because here's the great thing. Agents are good at things that have existed for a while. Profiling has existed for a while. Hence, they can know what to do. But it's not just caching. This is not a one trick
Mhm.
thing. What other mistakes could we make?
Yeah, let's see another example.
So you said that, you've done some stuff in Jupyter, which tends to be data science. What if we were going to do some scientific computing? Let's go ahead and we're going to say do the bad. Do.
I really appreciate
Oh,
your file naming, by the way.
it was, I just told Claude to be as explicit as humanly possible so I could figure out what the files were when I had to look later.
I mean, it's smart, it's clean.
Thanks. I spelled it right. We're going to find out if I spelled it right. I did. All right. So it's doing its thing and 4.379 seconds. So numerical computation, as we saw, is taking much longer than my nice
Mhm.
little caching for, music app or whatever we're going to, produce and sell on our vibe coded market. But after Claude fixed it with, again, the data that the profiler monitored and shoved in there, how much better did it get? Boom. Look at that.
Wow.
0.06. And now this one was a bigger change. So if you
Much
look,
better.
look at all that red. So much red. So huge change here. In this particular case, it was like you are doing mathematical things and you're not necessarily using a mathematical library. Have you
Uh,
considered pandas or have you considered NumPy? Because for math, these are better. And I
yeah.
was like, oh, sure, go ahead and try and do that thing. And so this shows you that sometimes it's not that you are using what you have wrong, it's that you have
Mhm.
the wrong tool.
Yeah, I could imagine this being interesting as people are kind of starting to experiment with, using polars instead of pandas, or sometimes pandas is the right tool for the job. This would be a really useful exercise to go through before you decide on which of those data frame libraries you're going to work with.
And hopefully you've got a local agent that you can run that can write two different versions of your code for you, and then you can run the profiler on both and do that comparison. And the thing is, maybe your time is going to be vastly improved, but
Mm,
are you using a lot more memory or are you using a lot more CPU? And in your particular environment, what choices of server do you have to deploy to? So
mhm.
is time not as much of a concern because you can have it run overnight or over a weekend? Is it more important to work within the resource bounds that you have than time? So you can work to optimize for what you need to optimize for.
Yeah, it seems like it's transparency, and you can make really informed decisions as opposed to those guesses or
And then
assumptions,
again,
I
never
guess.
trust the agent. Always like test. And I think I'm not sure if we mentioned it before the show or during, but there have been cases of agents faking test results. So even if you write some tests, maybe also like double check because agents really like to be told they've done a good job to the point that they will literally hard code a test to return that it passed.
Yeah, I think that this is one of those things you will learn over and over and over again, all the ways that the agent can be wrong. There's always something new, so just stay vigilant. Um,
Yeah.
Surprising the number of times something has happened where it's like, "Oh, you just changed the name of that function. I don't know why you did it, but now that doesn't work anymore because of all the places where it's not renamed." Stuff like that. Sometimes
Hmm.
something little.
And so, yeah, like we went from having some stuff where it's like, hey, here's your CPU usage, and it's like, what do I do with this? To being able to no, again, if you don't have an agent, you absolutely can still use a search engine, etc. And there's kind of like three phases to work through. The first is, okay, am I using this library in the most efficient way that I can? Am I
Mhm,
repeatedly calling it when maybe I should just call it once and save the result and reuse it?
mhm,
Or, is there some libraries have multiple functions that do similar stuff because one is getting slowly like phased out and then the other one's new, maybe.
mhm.
So maybe you could try that. Uh, and so, like, first, work with what you've got. Second, figure out how you've called it. Have you called it, you know, 50 billion times? That's not a great use of time and loading.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's not the great library for you. Just go to your search engine of choice. Or I believe I heard Anaconda release some kind of compare. packages thing recently. I don't know. Somebody will have to maybe come on and tell you or Dawn about that. But I heard there was a comparison of packages thing. So whether you use a search engine or you use that, find out, is there a better tool? So first, mess with the tools you have. Next, maybe look for a better tool. And then kind of like we mentioned earlier, could you also just like try randomly switching out your Python interpreter? If you go for the, free threaded one, does everything magically get better? Or, whatever, if you say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do lazy imports, does it suddenly
Mhm.
get better? And so you have a lot of options, and that's where I personally get overwhelmed, because the profiler gives you some data. Here's what's bad. Most profilers are not telling you how to fix it because there's so many different ways to fix
Yeah.
it.
There's a lot
But
of
now we've got this kind of stuff to help us at least come up with some ideas to try.
Yeah, when you've got so many variables at play, I think that this is a really nice use case where the agent can not only add some clarity, but it'll give you a way to try a lot of things relatively quickly. I think that I get a little hung up when I'm, uh, I guess, I need to think through all of the ways that the thing that I'm writing might be used and in what settings. So it's not just like, this is the stuff that's going on your computer or like how you've implemented it. Now you have to sort of understand all of those variables wherever this is going to go live. And that's just like a thought experiment sometimes, but sometimes it's very real and
Mm-hmm.
can get overwhelming very quickly.
Absolutely. But yeah, so I guess the quick recap on this is my team wrote a cool alpha that's about to go into beta. And if anyone is interested in signing up for the beta, please follow the links in the show notes, because we would love to talk to you and sign you up to try this out. What is different about what we have done versus all of the other profilers out there is we are storing it specifically in a way that it can chit chat with an MCP. We've also got a skill if you want to use a skill instead of an MCP. And we are trying to make it easy to have it on like all
Mhm.
day. So you come into the office, you can have the listener listening all day. So it's not that you forgot to turn on the profiler in a specific situation. You can see, like, for me, I could see, hey, for all the sessions, the 10 times I ran it before just to make sure it was working before we came on, for, the demo gods weren't going to, get me. It could look through all of those circumstances, and maybe one time was really really bad because something else on your computer like YouTube was eating up everything, versus the
Mhm.
other times weren't, so it could actually look across that kind of information. Now you could absolutely replicate this without being a person that participates in the beta, and our beta might flop. Everybody might be like, that's a cool idea, but actually I'm fine with using profilers the way I am. So that is also okay. Experiments happen for a reason. This may or may
Mhm.
not be something that the market wants. That's what the beta is to find out. Please join
Mhm.
and tell me. But you can do it yourself. I'm sure there's skill marketplaces out there you can try, or you could even work with your agent of choice to write a skill to have
Mhm.
your agent chit chat with your profiler's output.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of elevating this as a way to approach optimization. That's not necessarily something that's always been very approachable approach. And so this
Exactly.
kind of
Make it easy.
lowers the barrier for entry a bit into using this, like adding this to your toolkit, essentially.
Exactly.
So we're kind of at the end, I think, of our demo. And now I just wanted to see like if anyone's got questions in the comments, or if you've got more to add, Nicole, because we could talk through any number of other things that you have going on in the world.
So I think just a couple of random shout outs. If you are someone who got really annoyed or passionate about something we were talking about earlier, you might potentially be a speaker. And if you want to be a speaker, even if you've never been a speaker before, try it out. It's fun. There's some calls for speakers going on in the Python ecosystem. PyBay has their call for proposals coming through July 12th, and PyCon Ireland has theirs going through July 31st. So just use your search engine of choice to find them and take the thing that you want to teach people about, and even if the topic's been done before, you might present it in a new way. Go ahead and apply to be a speaker. On the other hand, if you do not have something that you were super passionate about and you needed to share with the community, but maybe you are super passionate about doing your job, whether that's data science, ML, who knows, and maybe you want to share that with some product managers so that they could make better stuff, because they can't do things if they don't know what you're doing and what problems you're running into. And it's not a sales call. Talk to your local friendly product manager. You can talk to the Anaconda product managers by looking for the notes in the show notes. But I'm sure many companies have product managers who are desperately seeking you. So feel free to look on LinkedIn and find them, because they would love to talk to you, and they're not going to sell you things.
No, it's always sort of this thing that I see happening in the wild where people will say, "This sucks," and they'll say it to me. But now that I'm, in the role that I'm in, that helps. But before I was not in that role. And
You
so
could not share that with anyone who could
I
do anything
could
about
not
it.
do. And you could say, like, "Why don't you open a GitHub issue?" And they'd be like, "Oh, no, no, someone else will probably do that." Or like, it's like, yeah, all of a sudden, it's like my
Bystander effect.
responsibility. Exactly, exactly. So even though it might not feel like it's the kind of thing that you can influence, you can, I promise. And
So
sometimes,
I am going to put in a plug. Check the GitHub or whatever first to see if it is already there. And if
that's
it is already there, comment or upvote it. Because as a product manager who's looking to prioritize things, if I see something in my backlog that has a lot of comments or a lot of upvotes or whatever, that gives me a lot of signal to say this is important to a lot of people. Whereas if it's just one person, I'm like, okay, well, one person cares about this, but one person is only one person. If there's a lot of people, that means that there's, because for every person who comments, there's a whole bunch who didn't. But the more people that comments means there's a whole bunch more people that didn't. So whatever it is in life, share feedback, because it won't get better otherwise.
Yeah, I think outside of just even upvoting, you can oftentimes contribute like another edge case or something that you hit where this was supposedly fixed. Like you might find a closed issue and
That's not closed.
and it's not really closed. You've created a zombie issue now where you have to resurrect it or bring it up in a new way because there's only no one is omniscient. Like we don't know what's happening in the ecosystem. And so if you have like a particularly interesting way that you might use profiling, we definitely want to hear from you. You might feel like this is an outlier, but we have to take into account all the outliers that we can find.
For sure.
Yeah. So looks like we've only got a few minutes left. So Nicole, was there anything else that you might want to share about any of the other work that you do before people get off, or to share where people can find you?
You can find me all sorts of places on the internet. My current handle is Circuit Swan, which is in my name tag. I had the old handle Amazon V, but then this book company started getting popular, and then you could not find me because they were popular, and I kind of was lost in the noise. So my new handle, Circuit Swan, if you see Amazon V around, that is me, but I've transitioned all my handles. I am on your GitHub and your GitLab and your Blue Sky and your Mastodon and your LinkedIn. Yes, it's LinkedIn/in/Amazon V, and I think I've got one at Circuit Swan. So I am all the places. Reddit. Yeah.
No, do you have a favorite way that you like people to contact you? Or because I mean, there's all these places people can follow you, but if they want to start a
Best of
conversation,
best of luck.
okay,
So
that's a very
because
real answer.
yeah, my inbox is an exciting place, and so are all my mentions, because I help run Sky Talks and Besides Edmonton and Diana Initiative, and we are getting into Hacker Summer Camp season. For anyone who's unaware, everyone in the information security industry goes to Las Vegas in the middle of summer for
Love
reasons.
that.
Yeah, and melts, and does a whole week of conference stuff, and I am one of the people who helps facilitate a lot of that stuff. So I don't actually attend. I haven't attended in years, but I happen. And so right now, everybody would like my attention. You will have better luck come October.
Okay, well, that's a very honest response. I do think, though, that we
Unless you
might need
sign
to
up
run
for the
the beta.
beta, and then you
Yeah,
get guaranteed time with me.
so the beta is important, and you'll get to talk to Nicole before anyone else gets to, and you won't have to wait for the people in the desert to come back out. But thank you so much for your time, Nicole. It's been really great getting to talk to you. Looking forward to seeing more of this work and finding out how the beta goes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I think this was a great first time playing on StreamYard. So
Only a
congratulations.
couple of little glitches, guys, and not too bad. Not too bad. This is kind of fun. So thanks for the chance to, be the facilitator here. If you're normally the facilitator, I got to do a little bit of that. So it's nice. But we're going to sign off now, and feel free to add comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.